an appreciation as to what this disaster management bill is seeking to do. Part 1, Mr. Speaker, of this bill comprises clause 1 to 4, which constitute preliminary provisions. So clause 1 provides for the short title and commencement of the legislation. Clause 2 provides for the definition of certain terms used in the legislation, and clause 3 provides for the purpose of the act. So, Speaker, part 2 of the bill comprises clauses 5 to 13 and makes provision for the establishment of the National Emergency Advisory Council. Establishment of the council would provide a mechanism for the key stakeholders in disaster risk management to consult with each other and to coordinate their actions on matters relating to comprehensive disaster management. Mr. Speaker, part 4 of the bill contains clauses 14 to 35 and addresses the establishment, functions, and other matters relating to the management and administration of the National Disaster Management Agency, NADMA. The agency, Mr. Speaker, will be empowered, among other things, to do the following: to act as the national coordinating and monitoring body for comprehensive disaster management. 2, to encourage and support the development of community-based sustainable development programs and interventions aimed at reducing the risk and impact of hazards and disasters. Thirdly, to harness community resources for disaster preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. Fourthly, to encourage and support the establishment of resilience critical infrastructure. Fifthly, to plan and coordinate specialized training programs for volunteers and persons involved in disaster risk management, and to provide business continuity planning, advice, and assistance to the private sector. So, Speaker, clause 20 provides for directions to be given to the director in relation to the policy to be followed in the exercise of functions and duties imposed on the director. Clause 21 provides for the preparation of the National Comprehensive Disaster Management Plan and other plans, which shall comprise a statement of the contingency arrangement for responding to the threat of a hazard or during or after a hazard impact in Grenada. Clause 22 empowers the director to establish communication links by means of which the director is required to develop and maintain a director of the public and private entities which are involved in disaster management. Clause 25 provides for the functions and operations of a National Emergency Operations Center, and where necessary, supplementary Emergency Operations Center. The National Emergency Operations Center ensures the centralized coordination and control of emergency or disaster response and operations, and thereby reduces confusion and duplication of effort amongst lead agency in disaster management. Clauses 26 and 27 provides for shelters. Clause 28 deals with volunteers. Persons who wish to volunteer for purposes of assisting in emergency or disaster situations are required to submit their names to the director for registration. Mr. Speaker, Clause 29 and 30 provides for the functions and conduct of hazard inspectors, including inspections of premises for purposes of registering the premises on the list of shelters. Clauses 31 and 32, Mr. Speaker, provides for evacuation. 33 makes up provisions for employees who assist in emergency situations, and the employees are given a statutory right to payment by their employers for the period for which they have worked during emergency situation. But that period must not exceed 2 weeks. Part 4. Part 4 of this bill contains clauses 36 to 39 and provides for the establishment, functions, and powers of district disaster management committees. The function of the district disaster management committees include making recommendations with respect to preparation of the National Comprehensive Disaster Management Plan and providing technical guidance with respect to formulation of policy guidelines relating to coordination of disaster management. Mr. Speaker, Part 5. Part 5 of this bill comprises clauses 40 to 43 and deals with specifically vulnerable areas and the safeguard mechanism to be followed regarding the designation of such areas. Clause 40 empowers the Cabinet to designate an area as specifically vulnerable to a disaster. Clause 41 authorizes the Director to prepare for the approval of the Cabinet special areas precautionary plans for the mitigation and prevention of disasters in specifically vulnerable areas. Clause 42 directs the Cabinet to cause the draft of a special area precautionary plan to be published in the Gazette for purposes of inviting the public to submit comments on the draft plan before approving the special area precautionary plan. And clause 43 sets out further procedures which must be followed before a special area precautionary plan can be transmitted to the Cabinet for approval. Part 6. Part 6 of this bill contains clause 44, which provides for the various financial instruments in place to strategically and cost-effectively finance disaster management and response in accordance with disaster risk financing strategy. Part 7 of this bill contains clauses 45 to 52 and addresses the obligation of persons involved in disaster management. Clause 45 mandates every head of government or statutory entity to ensure that there is a liaison officer for purposes of communicating with the director in relation to procedures of the entity related to disaster management. Clause 46 directs every head of government or statutory entity and critical facility agency to prepare a disaster management plan and to review and update the plan annually. Clause 47 provides for the preparation of policy, strategy, and monitoring, reporting and evaluation framework by the head of every government or statutory entity and every district disaster management committee for purposes of guiding implementation of the disaster management plan. Clause 48 mandates the conduct of annual training and exercises relating to disaster management for all staff, members of every head of government or statutory entity, and every critical facility agency. And clause 52 directs certain persons who intend to exercise any power related to disaster preparedness and response under this law to first consult with the director before exercising the power. Part 8 of this bill contains clauses 53 to 56 and provides for the National Multi-Hazard Alert System and Declaration of Disaster. The National Multi-Hazard Alert System for Grenada shall be operated under the supervision of the Director. Clause 56 empowers the Director, a member of the police service, or a person acting under the authority of the Director to limit public access to any area when a declaration of a disaster or hazard alert is issued in respect of the area. Part 9 of this bill comprises clauses 57 to 66 and deals with miscellaneous matters. Clause 65 provides for protection of persons who, in good faith, exercises powers, duties, or obligations under this Act. Clause 59 provides for compensation to any person authorized under this Act who has suffered personal injury, loss, or damage to property in the course of performing functions under the law. And Clause 60 criminalizes certain antisocial conduct. Clause 64 is the regulation making provision for this bill. So there we have it, Mr. Speaker, all of the parts and clauses of significance that affects this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Leader of Government Business. Honorable MP for St. George Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will be brief because I would predict that we wouldn't have much back and forth on a bill like this. That's very easy for us to decipher. But, Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this bill, naturally, the passage of this bill, the Disaster Management Bill 2023, and to share some brief comments on the substance of the bill before us. This bill, as mentioned by the Leader of Government's Business, will bring Grenada's disaster management into the 21st century. It will help modernize it. It will guide, Mr. Speaker, essentially, the official operations of the National Disaster Management Agency, NADMA, to ensure that the functions and the powers of the agency are not limited to a ministry per se, but is properly staffed and has the competence in managing our disasters. and that the National Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy and Plan, as laid out in the bill, will be operationalized with NADMA now as an actual entity governed by law to manage disasters. So in a nutshell, the bill seeks to empower NADMA, Mr. Speaker, with the proper structure to do its work. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the definition for disasters outlined in the bill is broad enough to capture disasters like pandemics. We saw what occurred during COVID-19, in which it was not only economic or social, but it had a tremendous health impact on Grenada and the world over. So the definition is broad enough for NADMA to be able to perform the functions during a pandemic and to manage the disaster that it brings. Mr. Speaker, this bill has about 4 main objectives as outlined earlier on by the Leader of Government Business, but I will just go through them briefly for the sake of my presentation. And if you would permit me, I would like to read kindly. The first objective is to update the laws surrounding disaster management. The second objective is to design a comprehensive mechanism for disaster management in Grenada. The third is to formally establish NADMA as a statutory board. And the fourth, to repeal the National Disaster Emergency Powers Act and replace our current framework for managing disasters with the bill before us. So these are the 4 main objectives this afternoon that members are being asked to consider for support. Mr. Speaker, Part 4 of the bill, which deals with the District Disaster Management Committee, Section 38, subsection D, functions. In my belief, after listening to the debate earlier on today, I believe that we should include, if we reach committee stage, a mechanism for controlling the behavior of the district coordinators when they perform the duty of providing relief with aid, etc., to the various communities. And I'll tell you why I say so. Given the example that we had during Hurricane Ivan, where it was almost unfettered, when aid came, at the time it was called Nero, and district disaster coordinators, or they may have been termed something else at the time, would be given aid, whether it was from churches or other organizations internationally, through Nero, to give out to the most vulnerable and those widely affected. In some instances, reports did return, and there were evidences of it, of people taking more than they had to get and diverting it, rather than not giving it to the people most in need. So I believe that this particular section should cater for the behavior and the discipline of the individuals who, based on the bill, will be volunteers giving out relief, giving out aid in terms of managing their accountability and discipline as it relates to the distribution of relief. Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't spend too much time, but just to say further that Part 5 of the bill, especially vulnerable areas, as mentioned earlier, is one of the most critical parts of the bill, because it gives Cabinet the authority, but most importantly, the guidelines to follow for managing post-disaster situations. And I think the most key part about it is the question of mitigation. We need to avoid disasters, and therefore the bill seeks to consider the authority by Cabinet to prevent or preempt disaster from occurring. Take, for example, you had the situation with the road slippage of Molineux. And should this bill have been in place then, we may have been able to avoid a major catastrophe as we have seen now, in terms of the cost, in terms of the disadvantage to pedestrians, commuters, etc., drivers. And so bringing this now in line with standardized practice is critical. And this is what this bill seeks to do, essentially, as I mentioned. And as I mentioned, I would not be brief. Sorry, I would not be long. I will be brief. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, fully that I support the bill, and it has my full support. It is after lunch. I know most members would appreciate that, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, that's my comments on the bill proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable MP for St. George Northeast. All right, I sense no right further input. Honorable MP for constituency of St. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As usual, when a bill is good and satisfactory, I will stand to lend my support, and at this time, this is what I rise to do. This was a bill that started under the New National Party. I won't give the history of it, but I want to say here is we bill. And we, I mean, in general, don't get thing on the other side. I mean, we had that this morning, but it's we bill. So we brought it, and you have continued it, and this is what it has to be. I found it a very comprehensive bill, except I just want to say that I still get the feel, although there were expressions of a broader concept, but I still get the feel that disaster for us is when 24 hours we hear hurricane going to hit and it's at that latitude or that, and we start battening down windows and doors and that sort of thing. And I would like to urge us to broaden our scope in terms of disaster preparedness and make it an everyday business of the government and of the people to be prepared for disaster, and especially to include the issue of climate change a little bit more, because it is happening as we speak, and therefore we have to be aware of the changes. We have to maybe stress more on the issues of adaptation. How do we adapt to the changes? And broad issues around that in terms of water conservation and what we do. So it's disaster preparedness, I believe, should be more of a daily routine, especially for some stakeholders, maybe Ministry of Environment, and of course NADMA, who we're bringing the legislation to give support to. But I want to urge we as a nation be more aware of the issues of climate change and the havoc that it can wreak. And as I look at the news, I looked at, I think it's California with the snow issues, and they have it every year. But every year, or if it's not in one state, it's in another, and so many lives are lost. And we have been fortunate over the years that even when we have a disaster and we lose lives, that usually it is not an overwhelming amount. But always, and especially in a small population like ours, one life is lost. Carelessly is one life too many. And therefore, I want to commend the passing of this bill and just urge that we take the whole issue of climate change more seriously, that we all do our part wherever we are in this trial, and each one of us has a role to play. And through you, Mr. Speaker, I want to throw out an appeal to all of us as Grenadians. Protect our environment while we can, and let us take measures to adapt to whatever changes and to mitigate, so that if and when we do get, because you will get some disaster sometime, we are well prepared to confront it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable MP, for the constituency of St. Mark. And is it, who's like? Honorable MP for St. Andrews Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my support to this bill. albeit no mention was made that it was developed or drafted under the previous administration, but guess not convenient at this time. Mr. Speaker, that being said, I mean, it's really a straightforward one. And I think one of the things I want to just make reference to is the importance of education on this. We definitely, there is a need for widespread education. The content of this is great, and I must give credit to all of those who are involved in the inception, the drafting, and any modification. As a matter of fact, my memory serves me right, this actually was passed in the lower house and it died with the prorogation of Parliament, right? I'm subject to correction, but I believe it was. Yeah. Really critical. The issue of education, there's some need for a lot of us to be educated as it relates to processes when it comes to a disaster, pronouncing a disaster. As I'm saying that, I'm actually remembering a case where the public was extremely mad, and that time I was Minister for Education, why we did not close a particular school because there was a flood and, you know, a hurricane is coming and all of that, the country should be shut down. And, I mean, persons were shocked when they were told the process for doing that. Everybody can't just jump and really mad, and that time I was Minister for Education, why we did not close a particular school because there was a flood and, you know, a hurricane is coming and all of that, the country should be shut down. And, I mean, persons were shocked when they were told there's a process for doing that. Everybody can't just jump and pronounce that there's a disaster and there's a hurricane coming and all of that. There's a process. So ultimately, when it comes to not reporting to work, right, pronouncing that everybody should stay at home, there's a process. And of course, all of those things are necessary so that persons are educated. And so I want to strongly propose that coming out of this process and passing of this legislation, that widespread education continues, particularly at the community level. I really want to suggest that the continuation of education, I know NADMA has been doing a lot over the years, but of course we can never be totally satisfied that enough has been done to educate the public on critical areas as it relates to disaster. The other critical thing I want to make mention of is that of monitoring and evaluation. So yes, we may have documents, we may have strategies and plans, and all of that might be beautifully documented, but how do we stay on top of them? How do we ensure that who has to do this is doing it? And how do we come to the conclusion that it's done well? So for example, I love the aspect of this which speaks to different agencies and departments submitting their plan, which obviously would come from the National Strategic Plan. Now, enforcing that, ensuring that people follow and submit in a timely manner, ensuring that every organization, every department knows exactly what they have to do, when they have to do it. I want to encourage that we place just as much attention on this as we move forward passing this legislation, because it's one thing to pass the legislation, but implementation, monitoring, as I said, assessment, evaluation is also extremely critical. So this has my support with the encouragement.
Thank you, Honorable MP, for sending on your notice. Sorry, Southeast.
Not yet, notice.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too would like to lend my support to the bill. I was preempted to it. I was going to in fact give the history of the legislation and point out that the bill in fact had already been read and passed in the lower house on the 21st of March 2022, and the prorogation of Parliament, I presume, prevented it from becoming, sorry, the dissolution of Parliament prevented it from becoming law. So I didn't expect that there would be anything else but support for the bill. I do want to point out, Mr. Speaker, that when we do go to the committee stage, I do expect that at least one amendment would be looked at. And if we look at the act that is being repealed, which is the old emergency, one moment, let me just pull it up. The old National Disaster Emergency Powers Act, which was a 10-clause bill, which gave the Prime Minister a lot of power to do everything once he declared a state of emergency pursuant to a national disaster. One of the important clauses in that bill was the right for the Prime Minister to negotiate compensation with any person whose property or so would have been requisitioned or taken or used in furtherance of the aims or objectives of the Act, presumably to assist with treating with the disaster. And if there was no such compensation agreed, then it allowed for compensation to be paid pursuant to regulations made on the advice or recommendation of Cabinet. And so with the existing legislation, I think we recognize that while it provided for compensation to be paid to an officer or a person acting under the proposed bill in the event they came to any harm, the Act did not in fact provide for compensation to be paid to anyone whose property or who might suffer loss or damage as a result of the current proposed disaster management bill. And so when we get to the committee stage, Mr. Speaker, we would want to introduce an amendment that allows for Cabinet to be able to pay compensation to anyone whose property or so may have been damaged or who may have suffered some form of loss or damage as a result of actions taken by state actors pursuant to the Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. All right. Oh, is our government business?
Mr. Speaker, I'm just rising to thank the members, both sides of the House, for their contribution to this bill and for their pending support. We expect this bill to be strongly supported. I'm just rise to give my commendation on the contributions made. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Leader of Government Business. Honorable members, the question is that the bill be read a second time. All of those who have that opinion say aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. Indeed, the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The bill for an act shortly entitled Disaster Management Bill 2023.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House resolves itself into a committee to consider this bill part by part.
Honourable members, the question is that this Honourable House resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill part by part. All those who are of that opinion say aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. Indeed, the ayes have it. This Honourable House is now in committee.
Part 2, National Emergency Advisory Council.
Honourable members, the question is that Part 2, National Emergency Advisory Council, form part of the bill. All those of that opinion say aye. We had lunch. I'm not hearing the aye. Say aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it.
Part 3, National Disaster Management Agency.
Honourable members, the question is that Part 3, National Disaster Management Agency, forms part of the bill. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. Indeed, the ayes have it.
Part 4, District Disaster Management Committee.
Honourable members, the question is that Part 4, District Disaster Management Committee, forms part of the bill. All those who are of that opinion say aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. Indeed, the ayes have it.
Part 5, especially vulnerable areas.
Honorable members, Part 5, specially vulnerable areas, forms part of the bill. All those who are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no.
Mr. Chairman, just with your permission, a little correction. I believe that in part 5.
Part 5.
Where we have especially vulnerable areas, it should be especially vulnerable areas. And that, especially vulnerable. No, I'm saying that it should be with the E, especially as in particularly.
We, honorable member, I know sometimes there are jargons that are used. If the drafter says that's how it has to go, I'm not sure.
I will cede to the drafters in terms of legal matters, but this one I think is a matter of language. Because, Mr. Prime Minister, when we say especially, we are talking about particularly. It's a subtle difference. Materially, it won't affect the meaning, but I think if we have the opportunity to make it to be as precise as possible, that we should take it.
I want to lean on the drafters, all right? Honorable member, I heard you, but I tend to want to lean on the drafters because of what can be technical jargon in the field.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I may not change the price of cocoa, so I won't insist. Yeah.
Okay, so we go on as is? Honorable? We go on as is? All right, thank you.
I just wanted to highlight, Mr. Chair, that when we speak of disaster management in the context of that, especially vulnerable areas, it refers to geographical locations that are particularly susceptible. So while it might be correct in terms of the English language, the word especially vulnerable areas is a geographic term description. So.
All right, thank you.
To change it would mean something different in the context of the bill. So it should stand how it is. Yeah.
Stand on specially.
Especially.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable MP. All right, so honorable members, the question is that Part 5, especially vulnerable areas, form part of the bill. All those who have that opinion, say aye. Of the contrary opinion, say no. The ayes have it.
Part 6, disaster risk financing.
Honorable members, the question is that Part 6, disaster risk financing, forms part of the bill. All those who have that opinion, say aye. Those of the contrary opinion, say no. The ayes have it.
Part 7, obligations of persons involved in disaster management.
Honorable members, Part 7, obligations of persons involved in disaster management, forms part of the bill. All those who have that opinion, say aye. Those of the contrary opinion, say no. Indeed, the ayes have it.
Part 8, National Multi-Hazard Alert System and Declaration of Disasters.
Honorable members, the question is that Part 8, National Multi-Hazard Alert System and declaration of disasters form part of the bill. All those who have that opinion, say aye. Those of the contrary opinion, say no. Indeed, the ayes have it.
Part 10, miscellaneous. Part 9, sorry. Part 9, miscellaneous.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, thank you. Paragraph or clause 59. We wish to ask an amendment, Mr. Speaker, to insert so that part 59 now becomes 59.1 and that a new subclause 2 is inserted, which shall read, without prejudice to section 58.1, the Cabinet may, in its discretion, order that compensation shall be paid to a person upon being satisfied that the person has suffered loss or damage by reason of the exercise of a power conferred under this Act, and that the amount of the compensation shall be charged upon the consolidated fund. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, this is to ensure that where, as a result of the exercise of powers under the Act, someone does in fact suffer loss or damage, they have a right to recover from the state. Because even when you have a state of emergency, the state is required, acting under that law, to pay compensation to its citizens in the event the citizens' property assets are used in furtherance of the state of emergency, or in circumstances where persons may suffer loss and damage. And so we want to make sure that the law clearly articulates that. You would see the 59, if we make it 59.1, provides for a person who is carrying out duties under the Act, that if he suffers physical injury or loss or damage, or any personal property of his is lost, that he's entitled to receive compensation. But we similarly recognize that if, as a result of the exercise of the powers under this Act, someone suffers loss or damage, or their property, for example, is impacted, that they too should have the right under the Act to pay compensation.
All right, thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable members, the question is that Part 9, Clause 59, be amended by numbering the subclause as subclause 1 and inserting a new subclause, subclause 2, which reads, without prejudice to section 58, subsection 1, the Cabinet may, in its discretion, order the compensation shall be paid to a person upon being satisfied that that person has suffered loss or damage by reason of the exercise of a power conferred under this Act, and that the amount of compensation shall be charged upon the consolidated fund. All those who have that opinion say aye. Aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. Indeed, the ayes have it.
Schedule, Constitution and Procedures of the National Disaster Management Agency Board.
Honourable members, the question is that schedule, Constitution and Procedures of the National Disaster Management Agency Board forms part of the bill. All those who have that opinion say aye. Aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it.
Part 1, Preliminary Provisions.
Honourable members, the question is that Part 1, preliminary provisions, form part of the bill. All those who have that opinion say aye. Aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. Indeed, the ayes have it. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the House resumes and that the Chairman report progress on the bill.
Honourable members, the question is that the House resumes and the Chairman of the committee report progress on the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. This Honourable House now resumes. Honorable members, I have to report that the bill was considered by a committee of the whole House and passed with one amendment. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the chairman's report be adopted.
As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many of the contrary opinion, say no. The ayes have it. Indeed, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
sorry, Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the third reading of the bill.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill be read a third time and pass. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Of the contrary opinion, say no. Indeed, the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act shall be entitled Disaster Management Bill 2023.
Item 16, request for leave to move the adjournment of the Houses on matters of urgent public importance.
Sorry, Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House be adjourned sine die.
Honorable members, the question proposed is that the House be adjourned sine die. Sorry, Honorable Prime Minister.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Speaker. I know I did not perhaps use the opportunity on the statements by ministers to make this brief point, but I do want to announce in the House, if you permit me, Mr. Speaker, to indicate that as chairman of the RSS Regional Security System, to which Grenada is a signatory, that we have acceded to a request from the Prime Minister and Government of St. Lucia for the RSS to provide support to the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. As you may be aware, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia has, and in particular the town of Vieux has been plunged almost into a state of anarchy with rampant criminality. As many of 9 persons were shot and killed, many of them public-style executions over a period of 2 days last week. There's a famous saying that when your neighbor's house is on fire, you need to wet yours. But I think beyond that, Mr. Speaker, I think as brothers and sisters within the OECS sub-region, we owe it to our brothers and sisters in St. Lucia to provide whatever assistance we can to assist them in this very troubling time. As luck would have it, the RSS is also having its annual convention in Grenada next week. We believe most of the countries within the RSS treaty membership will provide men and women to assist our brothers and sisters in St. Lucia. We expect that the deployment of troops will, and servicemen will start in the coming days of this week. So I just want to publicly indicate that, and obviously our thoughts and prayers are with particularly the family, friends, relatives of the persons in St. Lucia who've lost loved ones as a result of the horrific criminality that has happened there. And I want to use this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, for us to understand that we cannot take our own safety, our own security, and the peacefulness of Grenada for granted. If it's happening in St. Lucia, if it's happening in Trinidad, if If it's happening in Jamaica, if it's happening in Guyana, it can happen in Grenada. And so, Mr. Speaker, the presence of firearms in our communities, and I don't just mean here in the context of Grenada, but within the Caribbean, poses a significant threat to the way of life of our people. And this is an issue that we have to tackle at all levels, not just from a law enforcement point of view. The glorification of firearms and guns, which emanates from North America, is something to be openly and wrongly condemned. And we need to make sure that we do everything to ensure that illicit firearms do not enter into the state of Grenada. And so, Mr. Speaker, my government will be taking steps to strengthen law enforcement's ability to detect and collect firearms. We are also intending to address the Firearms Act, and we will be proposing significantly stiffer penalties for persons who are found with illicit firearms within the state of Grenada. And so I just wanted to make the statement, particularly as it relates to what has happened in St. Lucia. We really do hope that with the assistance of the RSS that the situation can be brought to a sense of normalcy, and that the good people of St. Lucia can continue to go about their lives peacefully without fear that criminal gangs will run amok and end their lives prematurely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. And while we contemplate what the PM has just said, we have to pray for not just our nation, but for the other nations of the Caribbean, of CARICOM, that are under this particular spell or situation of gun and gang violence. All right, it has been tabled, an adjournment of the House, so I now take the vote. Honourable members, the question is that the House be adjourned, sign aye. All those of that opinion say aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The House now stands adjourned.
And not only work on those things that NCC asked them to be able to do. Mr. Speaker, I simply say, young Barbadians, there is going to be enough work for everybody, but you must get a skill. You must get a trade. You must get some certificates. We can work with you, but work with us. I beg you. Sir, I want to say something now, because there will be a lot of investment, and I'm going to talk to a few of them now. But I think it is important that we repeat that, look, investment is going to be critical to growth. Investment is critical to growth. We're not going to grow or ease the burden on people without investment. Government investment, local private sector investment, foreign private sector investment. Investment vehicles for the small people and not just the large people. But investment must equally be respectful of our people, our national spaces, and our traditions. This administration has made it clear that growth is essential. Leading the way, you will soon see projects. I know buildings, but them hear about that since the last administration. Well, the minister who is now taking responsibility for planning, the Honorable Senior Minister, member for Christchurch West, assures me that after the meetings that he will have in the next few days, that we will have some clarity on the start, but he expects it to happen within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Star, I hold you to it. But he looked back at me and tell me, when you hold me to that, remember I gave a start with Hotel Indigo in my constituency of Hastings. I said, you got me. And he is correct, because that has now come out of the ground, and even though we did the groundbreaking about 6 months ago, you see Hotel Indigo coming up. Similarly, the member for St. Peter is aware that we are in conversation with his constituents too, because the Pendry Hotel will take the place of the old Nikki Beach property and will include Port Ferdinand, and that will therefore require a slight realignment of the road, but all of the accesses to the beaches and to everything else is being protected. Is this the first realignment of a road in that parish? No, Mr. Speaker. The then Prime Minister Owen Arthur had a realignment of the roundabout at the top of Speightstown with BTII, Barbados Tourism Investment Inc. And the last government, without talking to us, had a realignment and built a bridge to the same, by the same Port Ferdinand, by the same Nikki Beach, and all we are doing now is making sure that we align that road properly so that we can get the best possible investment. Mr. Speaker, we will also be meeting with Pierhead Project next week, Friday, I believe. No, this Friday. And that is an investment being done for the front of all of Bridgetown here on the Carinage, and there will be implications for where the boats can dock, and there will be construction on that one part of Bay Street for the better part of the next 18 months to 2 years. It is going to mean traffic will be difficult in Bridgetown, and the Deputy Prime Minister knows, and her ministry will come up with an appropriate traffic plan and public education plan, because truly when you have those buildings out, and BTII has accepted, I believe, a proposal for the Treasury building, that will also be undertaken in the very near future, by the end of this year. It means that the next 2 years in the heart of Bridgetown will be a difficult place to navigate, and we hope that some kind of alternative arrangements will be put in place. Mr. Speaker, I have chosen to just refer to a few. We are going to see the relocation of the Civic Center in St. James, which is now on the beach, in there by Frederick Smith Secondary School, to allow us to be able to create more jobs for our people in the north, especially by ensuring another hotel can go on that site, and that will also lead as well to a top-class 6-star brand being added to the country. We will hear more about that in the very near future. Similarly, I have now had confirmation that the Royalton Hotel, which is on the previous Discovery Bay site, is expected to start by the 3rd quarter of this year, having settled its financial arrangements. Mr. Speaker, I assure you, I am not telling you about the projects that are not yet ready to start and that the Senior Minister has given me. I've tried to just focus on a few. And in addition to this, last year I would have told you about Marriott's undertaking, the Marriott Group, which is now the largest owner of hotel rooms in this country, undertaking a $150 million refurbishment. For reasons they had to push it back to this year. I met with the administration of Marriott, both in Washington and in Barbados, and the Minister of Tourism assures me that they will shortly be starting later this year to upgrade these properties. I've seen the plans, I'm happy, and it will bring a significant upgrade to the quality of their properties in this country. I want to use this opportunity, sir, to say that I hope that the owners, because Barbados has always had a higher percentage of indigenously owned properties in hotels than most other countries. And one of the things that we have to overcome is that we really have not improved the volume of our hotel room stock since the days of Sir Harold St. John in the 1980s by any substantial measure. And we have now, and I'm meeting with the owners of hotels tomorrow afternoon, I believe, with the Minister of Tourism, because many of them may want to be able to see how they can better redevelop their properties in this season of building, to be able to have greater density in some instances, and to be able to command a higher average daily rate in order to ensure that Barbados repositions itself. And in that, against that backdrop, please let me salute the hotel sector, the Barbados Tourism and Marketing Inc., and the Minister of Tourism and all the people who work in that ministry for us winning the Green Hotel Tourism Prize at ITB last week in Berlin. Number one, not in the region. Number one where? Number one where? In the world. That is what I mean by becoming world class. Sir, the truth is, this increased activity is all good. And we have new legislation from the Planning and Development that the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central helped shepherd, and the Honourable Member for Christchurch West is working. It may need some tweaking. The change management contracts are now being issued, but as I said, this now requires dedicated daily attention. And I am never too big to say that, come star, help me lift some more weight. Hence, Senior Minister Duguid, the member for Christchurch West, being asked to take full responsibility for the planning portfolio in Cabinet from tomorrow. Sir, successful development, therefore, is the art of balancing competing interests, including access to land for various uses by multiple stakeholders. Such competing pressures include the need to keep land in agricultural production. We know the debate all too well. Or should we use it for housing, industrial, commercial, or even recreational development sometimes? Coupled with that is the balance between development and the surrounding residents and the public in general, in terms of beach access, the shadowing and blocking of views with large expansive developments, the impact on water and sewage use, and not to mention the traffic impact and the increased road utilization. These and other factors, sir, must be balanced with the other side of the coin, such as investment and job opportunities and positive downstream benefits that these investments will bring to the community as a whole. Money in people's pockets, let me get real. These conversations must happen. They are healthy conversations, and we cannot predetermine each time on which side of the coin it will land. But we must have the conversations, and respect must be had on all sides. As a government, let me say this: we are committed to preserving the rights of all citizens in this country. And you don't have to ask. Let me make it clear. We've said from long time, there will be no private beaches in this country. Barbados must have access to the beach for all. Indeed, one of the conditions for the construction of the new Hyatt Ziva in Bay Street is a reconstruction of a facility, not just beach access, but a proper facility at the old Bridgetown Fish Market. For those, I was about to say next to Gasbros, but then I remember the people who don't know that don't know Gasbros neither. So the gray hair showing in my little words. But just literally below the Roman Catholic Cathedral, that open space there, that one of the conditions is the Hyatt Ziva, one, must build a facility there, and two, must contribute $2 million into a fund for urban transformation by the time the hotel opens, to be able to make sure that the people in the Orleans and the people in Chapman Lane and the people in Dando Lane and the people in Bay Street will have access to our low interest. And when I say low interest, I mean 2% or lower, Skipper. in order to be able to upgrade their housing stock in the city. Because when we upgraded Golden Square, when we upgraded Cheapside with the markets, and we're still continuing to finish now the Butcher's Market, and we're now going to upgrade what, if you ever walk down there, the people call Georgetown and Kingstown. Outside between Cheapside and River Bus Stand, we're upgrading there and also fixing the things that need to be fixed in the River Bus Stand, including the drainage problems that continue to bedevil the persons down there. Mr. Speaker, you cannot invite investment into the center of your town and leave your people lacking for it. And as to the taxi men who want somewhere to go, I heard you 2 Sunday nights ago when you stopped me at the top of Nelson Street and Fairchild Street. There will be, I go all over. There will be a provisioning for parking for you. The Deputy Prime Minister and her officials will meet with you. Clearly, space is limited on that road, but we believe we can find an accommodation for you so that you can ply your trade in good order in the same way that she found a solution for you with the increase of taxi rates after more than 20 years. Mr. Speaker, I say to you that in addition to no private beaches, there will be issues that we have to confront, as we're doing now, where people may believe that their public rights of way or public easements or other prescriptive rights are being put at risk. I think you will know where this government will land. We must respect those public rights, but equally, as people who want to own property, we must respect the right of owners of property to do on their land that which they want to do, so long as it does not offend those public prescriptive rights that I just referred to. And Mr. Speaker, nobody said governance was going to be easy, but we are going to do it, and we're going to have the conversations, and we're going to